Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our webinar, Leadership That Meets the Moment. We're so glad you're here. We'll be saving time for questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to submit your questions at any point using the Q&A feature. Tomorrow afternoon, you'll receive a follow-up email with a downloadable takeaway resource to support your learning. For more information on our broader solutions, including embedded workplace clinicians or dedicated on-site counselors, we invite you to visit our website. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand, so you'll be able to revisit this presentation or share it with others after today's session. I am pleased to introduce you all to our presenter, Jeff Gorder, R3's Vice President of Clinical Crisis Response. Jeff brings over 30 years of clinical experience, including consultation and extensive on-site critical incident response to businesses and communities. He's responded directly to the September 11th terrorist attacks, Hurricane Katrina, the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, the Las Vegas shooting, the breaching of the U.S. Capitals, and the 2025 DC aviation disaster, among others. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gorder to begin today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, and thank you to all of you for joining us at this time. And I appreciate very much how many things are calling for your time and your attention, and so your willingness to join us on this webinar is very much appreciated, particularly because we're going to talk about crisis and how leadership is a critical element in managing that crisis. And as I say that, I feel I need to give just a bit of a warning where there's no way to talk about crisis without addressing particular events and specific incidents that have occurred over the last few years. We are going to review those. And I'm aware that some of you, some of these events may hit uncomfortably close to home. You may well have been part of some of the things we're going to talk about. And so please, I ask you to extend me the grace and space as we go through this, to realize we are not talking about these things for dramatic effect or for prurient interest, but you can't talk about crisis without addressing the reality. And that, in fact, is the central theme of what we're going to be talking about, the reality of crisis today. So we're going to look at the impact of how crisis hits a workplace. We're going to discuss the cost of inaction, of doing nothing to that. And then I want to move to solutions around trauma-informed leadership and how that plays out in communication. And then look at some support resources that may be helpful to you when the next inevitable crisis occurs. Okay? Again, I welcome questions, but please put them in the Q&A and we'll address them at the end. So, we titled this, for such a moment as this, meeting the moment, and why this moment matters. It is a unique point in time. Take a deep breath, because if it feels like we've been stumbling from one crisis after another, it's because we have. I mean, think about it. I'll use the OG, the original crisis that we are all thinking about, the pandemic, which started 6 years ago, right about now. This is when the shutdowns occurred. This is when the world ground to a halt about 6 years ago. And for many of us, 6 years does not seem like a long period of time. Some of those reactions are still there. On top of that, we've had significant civil unrest across the country, including the racial justice protests that followed the death of George Floyd and several incidents since then. We saw that in the breaching of the U.S. Capitol, and more recently, ICE activity like in Minneapolis and other communities. So that is something to add to the boil. Now, here's some additional things we can add. The outbreak of war, the most significant outbreaks of war in a generation in Ukraine, between Israel and Hamas, and right now with us, with the U.S. and Iran, all of which create a sense of fear and uncertainty for so many of us. And the large-scale events that have gripped the nation, like the flooding of Asheville, of Texas, other hurricanes and major storms, continued wildfires, mass shootings in communities, and two major aviation disasters, the collision of the jet and helicopter in Washington, D.C., and then the crashing of the jet in Louisville. Um, we had gone more than a decade without any major significant airline disaster, and we had two in the last year. Then add the smaller but no less impactful tragedies that have struck perhaps your community, your workplace, or your family. It's not that each one of us has been directly involved in these things. It's just that we can't, um, we can barely keep them at bay and push them aside because there are so many and it has been occurring at such a rate. And for many of us, it creates a tragic sense of deja vu. It's interesting that over the period of time that I described, in 2022, the word of the year was permacrisis. Permacrisis. The reflecting of that time in 22. Now, in 2023, the World Economic Forum that meets in Davos um, focused exclusively on what they called polycrisis, the continual and subsequent sequence of crises that were occurring across the world. The term that is kind of settled over this period of time, and the one that we choose to align with, is what's called cascading collective crisis. And it is, I think it describes it in a better way, that it is not just one, and it is not just a singular event, but it is many happening in quick time and proximity sequence. And so they're collective, it's a cumulative impact of these crises. And that is the emerging digital framework. But what is unique about right now, because there have been other times in history where multiple bad things have happened in close time or sequence. That in and of itself is not the unusual factor. What is unusual for us right now, what is a new element to this, is our digital connectivity. Because it used to be, prior to about 25 years ago, it used to be that when events would occur, there was a sense of distance. This was something that happened over there to those people, to someplace else. It occurred somewhere, and I may have been upset or distressed or concerned about that, but there was a sense of distance. What is unique to our moment right now is that we can experience them in real time as they're occurring and rewatch them if we so choose, or as it's rebroadcast to us as close as the device in our hand or on our desktop. And so we are experiencing them as participants. It is literally arm's length away in which we are somehow a part and parcel of this. And in our polarized society as well, it's also exacerbated by how that information is presented. It used to be there was a time when they would say, this thing happened, here are the facts, here's what we know about it, and it was presented as information. Now, as these events occur that I described and others that I didn't even touch on, when they happen, they are presented through a framework that says, here's what occurred, and you should feel something. You should feel outrage. You should feel disgust. You should feel sadness. You should feel fear. It is not presented as information. It is presented as something that invites us to be participants and, by extension, victims as well for many of us. To feel like we are part and parcel of it and surrounded by it in many ways, just like the pandemic. There was no place on the globe where we could go and get away from it, and it was all we could talk about for about a year and a half. And it, in many ways, that sort of primed the pump, because now when new events happen, we are activated in many of the same ways that we were when the pandemic first struck. And because we are talking about, how does this impact the workplace? Why should I, as a workplace leader, care about that? Is because all of those events that I described, the cascading collective crisis, while it may or may not directly impact your workplace, your workforce is aware of them in the same way that you are. They are participants in the same way. They are tracking it in the same way. And so all of those events, that cascading collective crisis, creates either a perceived, I believe that there's a lack of safety, or in many circumstances, there's an actual lack of safety, particularly when we think about natural disasters, outbreaks of military action, or active shooter situations. In again, our polarized society, there is often a conflicting value alignment. What does this say about me as a person? Or what does this say about my company? Or what does this say about my community? What does this say about my country? And so for so many of us, we wrestle with the almost existential part of it. What is this? How do I make sense of this and square this with my view of the world? As I touched on, it can easily trigger situations around discrimination, exclusion, injustice, and areas that again activate us, as they should, around what is happening and who's being involved. It highlights and shines a light on the lack of resources that we might have to readily respond to these things. And it creates inconsistent communication. As we all know, what we hear on those first few hours after a crisis and what we hear 2 days later are often vastly different things. The number of victims or fatalities can often is overreported because we're just not sure. And then as things settle down, we find out how many were actually impacted or how widespread the devastation was. And so it leads us to say, yeah, you're telling me this, but can I believe it? Can I trust it? And at the end of the day, the cascading collective crisis exacerbates a sense of, how am I supposed to manage this? What can I do in response to military outbreaks on the other side of the globe, yet they are touching perhaps members of my family? Or what am I supposed to do with a natural disaster, with wildfires that are spreading across areas, or hurricanes or floods that I can't? It just enhances a sense of powerlessness, which makes us all feel off task and concerned, of course, understandably. So let's bring this back to leadership's role. Leadership in a time like this is a responsibility, not a liability. It is part and parcel of being a leader. It's and the reason we're going through this, and I'm so appreciative of your presence here, is because I am hoping that knowledge is power. The more we know, the better we can chart our course, the better we can meet the needs of our employees, because consequently, that is how we are best meeting the needs of our organization, our business. Our business relies on people who are able to show up to work and who are able to provide the services and productivity that we rely on. But your employees are looking to you. Can I go to work? Should I go to work? Can I think about work when I'm here? And so there is a synchronicity. Your employees are looking to you for leadership when these kinds of events happen. Now, a couple of the myths, a couple of the things that characteristically will leaders might question and say, particularly in a highly polarized setting like this, listen, if I address it, maybe it's going to make it worse. It didn't happen here. It didn't happen in our warehouse. So do I really need to address it? Maybe I just, talking about it will make it worse. Let's pretend like it didn't happen. Or, again, due to polarization, maybe I need to stay neutral. And certainly, it is understandable, and that leadership has to wrestle very intentionally about what I will say. But many will come to think that neutrality means silence. I just won't say anything about it because it's safer that way. Just don't talk about it. Let's pretend as if it didn't happen. The reality is, though, of course, your employees are acutely aware, and they're getting updates on a regular basis, telling them as this thing unfolds, and then they look to leadership. And if there is nothing, if there's no answer, no response, no acknowledgement of the reality, that is gripping everybody, it diminishes leadership's capacity and the trust and respect that they have. So as leaders, it's important to acknowledge the reality of the day, the crisis that is occurring, because that is the building blocks of trust. It is how stability, knowledge is power. So having a trusted, verifiable leader who shares information about how it impacts our workplace is calming and is stabilizing for that workforce. And it is risk reducing because, again, instead of people reacting out of a heightened emotional state or operating machinery when distracted about the news of the day, there we can see how accidents and risk manifolds if it is not addressed and if resources are not brought. So acknowledging the fear and the uncertainty is an essential element of leadership at work. Now, all of that was somewhat uh, 10,000 feet up. Those are some good concepts, but I want to break it down to, the hidden costs. There's a return on your investment when a leader addresses it ahead, and there is subsequently a cost, a physical, emotional, but certainly financial cost, because when leaders stay silent, again, the erosion of trust and psychological safety, and that is a key element in whether your people show up. Are they going to call into work? Do they show up kinda presenteeism, or what we've come to call quiet quitting? I'm showing up here, but if leadership doesn't get it, if this company doesn't get it, if they don't understand the realities, I'm doing the minimal possible. I'm basically kind of just showing up and just hanging out. They are disengaged, and for many of them, particularly, um, many employees judge the quality of a workplace. Do I want to stay here? Do I want to expend my time, energy, and efforts in this workplace? I want to know that it is a responsible workplace, that it is one that acknowledges the realities that are around us. And so, if that doesn't happen, they start looking for the door. They start checking out other options. This is where burnout and or just simply leaving occurs, and we can see that employees will judge an organization on how well they manage that crisis. So the bottom line is that inaction is still an action. It's just not a good one. It's not one that's gonna help your organization or your employees through this time. So further implications, again, just highlighting the fact that what your employees are going through, understanding what they are experiencing in that cascading collective crisis that I described earlier, to know what are they going through as persons, as individuals, as humans themselves. That repeated period of I'm geared up because of the crisis, and then I can only sustain that adrenaline rush for so long before I kind of collapse in exhaustion. And then the next crisis happens and I gear up again, and this repeated pattern of anxiety and physiological arousal to meet the challenge, followed by exhaustion, is depleting for any workforce. It has the potential because, as I highlighted, many of these fall into a potential for polarization, and it can disrupt or even sever the connections, the cultural connections, the community connection, the work family that you have taken so much time to build, and to have this culture of belonging, a culture of engagement, a culture where people know I am part of the team, I am oriented around the mission, and we can do some things. But silence is going to sever that, and the crisis is going to challenge that. Um, Not surprisingly, when there's one fearful thing after another, it generates general suspicion. Who can I count on? Who can I trust? Which understandably leads to a pervasive and reactive anger. It is my personal belief that so much of the anger that we see on from politicians, from community leaders, from influencers, from entertainment figures, television hosts, and all of that. I think that the anger is in many ways a reflection of the cascading collective crisis. The fact that they are full up with all of that emotional energy from those crises. And when you stumble from one to the other, you never really deal with it. You just keep going and they just keep building up. And of course, that, at the end of the day, can lead to an increased propensity, a likelihood for significant mental health issues to develop depression, PTSD, or panic attacks as a result of the fear. So your employees are going through this. If you remain silent, it's still happening. So, okay, I recognize it. What I've shared so far, kind of a bummer. And I don't mean to be, again, I don't mean to be dismissive or take it lightly, but I didn't mean to necessarily take you on a sort of a tragic memory lane as we go back and think about all those things. But we need to acknowledge that that's the reality where many of us are starting from. But let's start talking about what can we do about this? What can you as a leader do about it? And I suggest that a trauma-informed workplace, because workplaces are the central connection point for most adults in the USA. It's where most adults spend 40 plus hours a week or however many, but that's where we connect with others. That's where we share ideas. It's where we are engaged in meaningful work. It's again that sense of work family. And so if my workplace is a trauma informed workplace, that offers a sanctuary of safety and support, a place where people can bring their whole selves to work, and be valued for who they are. Because the reality is, they don't leave those concerns, those worries, those emotional reactions in the parking lot and then walk in and they're a completely different person. Of course, they bring themselves to work, including all of the things that are going on. And so, my point is that your employees have lived through these events just like you. And it's not a question of if they've been exposed to trauma, it's a question of how many have they been exposed to. And a responsible leader wants to respond to that and address that in a way that creates that psychological safety in the workplace. So, trauma informed leaders cultivate the conditions for post traumatic growth. And I'm going to talk more about that. That may be a term that many people are very familiar with, the term post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It's sort of a common designation that many people think about. But I don't know how many of you are aware that post-traumatic growth, statistically, is actually more likely. And we'll touch about that in a moment. But a trauma-informed leader is known by, is marked by, cultivates that compassionate presence. They're not afraid to talk about these powerful emotional things. They have an understanding of trauma. At the very least, they recognize that trauma is not a rare and unusual thing that doesn't happen around here and isn't something I really need to pay attention to. They recognize that trauma has in many ways become normative in this age of cascading collective crisis. And as a result, I am wise to deal with it rather than pretending that it's not happening. And a trauma-informed leader is able to be open to hold space for, to not be thrown by the emotional struggles that their employees may be displaying at work or coming and sharing with them. It's again, you've created a space where you want to hear about it. You want them to share that with you. Not that you as a leader have now become a therapist, not in the least, but that you are aware of the basic reality that trauma is ubiquitous in our environment right now. And as a leader, it's important to support the whole person, not just the role. Again, they bring themselves to work. So I mentioned post-traumatic growth, and I want to take a bit of a rabbit track here if I can. But I want to make sure, I want to differentiate this from what's come to be called toxic positivity. And that is where it's kind of like what back in the day, and this may be aging myself, but there was a term, whistling as you walk past the graveyard. It's the thing of like, I'm just going to pretend that nothing happened, nothing to see here, and I'm going to keep moving. Everything's positive, everything's all good, and that suppression or dismissal of the negative emotions that are unavoidably a part and parcel of the challenges we face. And so, we saw a lot of that, particularly towards the end of the pandemic, when we were just kind of tired of people, sort of the rah rah leadership. Come on, you can do it. Hang in there. Um, my my wife, who was a teacher, they actually gave out posters where it said, you can do it. You can do tough things. Yeah, I can do tough things. Do I have to? Do you have any idea how hard it is to do those tough things? Um, that kind of toxic positivity, the don't worry, be happy, that diminishes trust in leadership. It negatively impacts the culture. It communicates that this is not a safe place to be real, to bring yourself, to be. This is not a work family in which I can find myself encouraged as well as feeling like I'm not alone. That toxic positivity clearly sends the message we are pretending like the reality just didn't happen. So I want to be clear. I just feel like I want to make sure that people understand that is not what we're talking about when we talk about post traumatic growth, PTG. That is the positive change experienced as a result of struggling with a highly challenging or stressful life circumstance. So it is not denying that the bad thing happened. It is acknowledging and validating the reality, but we are also not having that, again, toxic positivity that might say, oh, you poor thing. Oh, my goodness, what you went through. Oh, I just don't know how you're making it. Projecting a sense of victimization, um, sort of diminishing or getting rid of their capacity to respond to the challenge, to rise to that moment, and even perhaps rise above it. And so it's part and parcel of I mean that is resilience. Resilience is going through the bad thing and coming out on the other end, having learned something, having tested something, having been challenged and succeeded. It doesn't mean that it was easy. I want to be clear. I'm not minimizing or dismissing the pain that so many of us went through over those events that I described and others that were perhaps more personal. But by that same token, I would never want to minimize or dismiss the inherent capacity of the human spirit to rise to the moment, to rise above it, to come on the other side and say, I would never want to go through that again, but I learned something about myself, about my company, about my coworkers. I learned something about my community through having gone through that. And it isn't dismissing it or negating it, but it is gathering those life lessons that are inevitable and that are present in there. And as I hinted at earlier, the interesting thing is research shows that following traumatic events, while we might think, oh my goodness, PTSD is inevitable, right? Turns out that PTSD is the least likely reaction for most people, and that the vast majority of people exercise their resilience. They're able to meet the challenge, and again, sometimes it's just pure endurance and getting through it, but it means that we do get to the other side and we're able to see a new day and we're able to think about how we got through that. And we're going to dive into that a little more specifically. So I referenced research, and so the research from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, it is the federal clearinghouse and the research arm of all things related to mental health. And so the research there is often definitive and considered the gold standard. And that SAMHSA some years back identified trauma-informed leadership as that which realizes, recognizes, responds, and resists trauma. And so realizes, it's a lot of what I've been saying. It just recognizes the fact that for so many of us, it's quite frankly, it's hard to be on this planet for any extended length of time without encountering some potentially traumatic event. That is part of life. And to deny that uh, is to be continually surprised and shocked when the bad thing happens, as opposed to an understanding that, listen, trauma is in many ways a normative experience. It's part and parcel of being an adult in this world. And so I have to recognize that trauma exists, but so does the healing, the growth, the post-traumatic growth is also equally likely. So they realize that. They recognize the signs, the symptoms, the displays of reactions that many of my employees, maybe my customers, may be experiencing as well. And so I educate myself on understanding and recognizing that it's out there and I can see it. I want to use that as perhaps the lens through which I view some of these troubling behaviors. And they respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into their policies, their procedures, their practices at their workplace, creating a psychologically safe workplace where um, where employees can receive resources, be honest about what's going on, to be able to receive encouragement and a sense of community that supports them. And so we'll talk a bit more about how that can play itself out in policies. And then finally, it resists re-traumatizing them, and understand that ignoring or pretending or dismissing a traumatic event is in and of itself re-traumatizing, because it communicates to that person who's gone through the difficult or painful event, and it says, ah, nothing to see here. You shouldn't feel that way. Your feelings are, if you feel anything about this, then it's all on you. It's a personal failing. It's some, buck it up. Again, back in the day, when I was a child, if we were hurt in sports or something, the old playground adage, well, rub some dirt on it and get back up. Okay, that sounds great. And again, there is a certain place for toughness, but not without acknowledging that there was an injury, that something happened and it was significant. And it's up to me to be able to grow through that and to move from that. So, I want to bring it down to some specific things that you, as a trauma informed leader, can do. And trauma informed qualities, capacities, some actions that you can take. First off, do no harm. As I said, folks who have gone through a trauma or who have recently been exposed to a potentially traumatic event, there is a certain amount of vulnerability. There is an emotional sensitivity, and I'm not saying, we dance around it on eggshells, but I want to make sure that my approach to them is one that lets them know this is a safe place. We can talk about this. I am open and willing to hear from you what your lived experience is like right now after having gone through this event. So we want to first create an environment. We want to be empathic. There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy and sympathy. Empathy is that ability to see and acknowledge the emotional reactions that a person may be going through having gone through a difficult thing. It's wanting to walk a mile in their shoes. It's wanting to understand what it's like for you. I'm not presuming. I want to know, help me understand what it's like for you right now. That's empathy, being able to walk alongside. Sympathy is, oh, you poor, poor thing. Oh my goodness, wow, that, whew, you've got victim written all over you. I'm sure glad I'm not in your shoes. Sympathy is viewing them in an other way, as if they are an other, as if they're damaged good, as if there is something wrong with them or something broken about them. And so sympathy does not typically result in forward movement or a positive reaction. Being able to talk about it openly. We started off by recognizing that silence has both personal and professional costs, business costs to them. So able to talk about the situation, acknowledging it openly, being self-aware, recognizing while I am encouraging you as leaders to reach out to and provide that safe context for your employees, surprise, you're human too. And a lot of the events, particularly the big events that I talked about, it's not as if you're immune from reacting to them as well. Recognizing that you may be having your own reactions to this and having the EQ, the emotional quotient, the emotional intelligence that is self-aware as well as aware of the others. Being flexible, providing opportunities for folks to adapt to the situation, as opposed to I need to fit you, the round peg, into my square hole. This is what our work can do, and this is all it is. So I need you to fit into this, and we need to be flexible about how we approach this. We need to be comfortable with the unknown. We're not particularly, as I said, in some of the big ticket items, we're not always going to have the full amount of information. We're not going to know all that there is to know about it, which is, again, is what we crave. It's what we want. If I only knew everything that was, all of the details of this, then I could, chart my course more effectively. But we have to be comfortable with the unknown. We're not going to know everything, and other stuff may become apparent. Um, I think that opens the door for the next one, is that if we are comfortable with the unknown, we have to recognize that our colleagues may well be a source of that information. I want to find out from those employees what their lived experience is right now. Maybe not only about this event, but about other things that may have happened in their life that shaped this event. I want to be able to learn more. I have a curiosity about my colleagues, my coworkers, my community. And that, of course, is the willingness to step into the world of the employee, to be able to have that empathy that walks alongside them, that says, listen, my concern for you as a leader is not just how much I can squeeze from you, how much I can get from you, how much productivity. Those things are important. They are essential. They are part of the reason they work in your organization. But those things will only be maximized when that person is able to bring their whole selves to work, when they're able to deal with the event that happened, and to know that you are a resource for that you as a leader will help them find the ability to step forward and what that looks like. We're going to touch on that more. And that willingness to show your own vulnerability. Again, that I am a human too, and that I get the fact that this is powerful for you as it is for me, perhaps in different ways, but it certainly is. And something that I think is kind of a buzzword right now, if you will. It's a big in business communities to say, what is the culture of my organization? What defines it? How does it feel? What's the ethos, the mores, the values, the mission of our organization? All of those things that go into say, what's the culture of my place? And it's a fascinating thing that we've come to realize, that crisis confirms culture. When a crisis happens, it shines a bright spotlight on the culture of the organization. It's not that when a crisis happens, I have to make something up as if it's an alien situation, even if it is unexpected. The reality is, when I have a caring culture, a safe culture, a culture that expects professionalism and supports people in optimizing their performance, that shapes the culture. And how a leader reacts or doesn't react shapes a culture, because it sends a message that we are caring, that we're competent, that this is a place where we believe in you and we believe you can get past this. We believe in post-traumatic growth, which is another, courage, I think, is another aspect of that. We are communicating. We are wanting to make sure that we are sharing as much information as we can, establishing ourselves, the leader, as a source of verifiable information in the midst of perhaps chaos or confusing messages. We want to be visible and present. Never underestimate the power of presence, simply being there. I know this sounds silly, but 80% of helping is just showing up, just being there, just being willing to sit in that moment and not be afraid or uncomfortable with the emotional power of what's going on around you. And so just being present and visible is a big step towards helping them know they're not alone. And then bringing the right resource at the right time as a reflection, an operational reflection of that caring and that culture. So, so one way we do this, and I want to, I know this is a bit psychology 101. I'm diving into it, but I really want to challenge you to think about how you interact with individuals who are displaying concern or are presenting with problematic behavior or decreased performance. I want you to think about, what do I do when there is a challenge with an individual or in a team? And that for many of us, if we're honest, we've historically come at it from a deficit-based perspective. A deficit-based perspective, which is kind of, how do I say it, our grandfather's way of doing business. It was sort of defining people, groups, or teams by their problem, by their struggle, by their challenges, or by their failures. If only this bad thing hadn't happened, why then everything would be better, and it's really the issue's fault. Or, I wish we woulda, coulda, should have done X, Y, and Z instead. If only we had, been able to rise to the occasion, we'd have been able to get past this. And who's at fault? Who's to blame? Who dropped the ball here? I need to find somebody to attribute that failure to. Or, again, a dismissal or denial of the reality post game. Well, I'm glad that's finished. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's get back to normal. As if it never happened, as if it was the way it used to be. Wanting to skip past the negative event as quickly as we can, again, leads people to say, oh, okay, I guess we're pretending now, aren't we? Fine. I can go with that until I find something else. So, deficit based. I want to challenge us to think about it from an asset framing perspective, where we define people, groups, teams by their aspirations, by their contributions, their past achievements, what they have done in the past, and how they have risen to those occasions in the past, those challenges. So when we think about it, that list of negative things that I described over the last 6 years, ask yourself, perhaps ask your team, how did we get through that? What did we do to get past those things, to rise above those? How did we endure? Did we ever really celebrate that? Did we ever really acknowledge the hard work and the effort and the adaptation that was required from each of us? Let's celebrate that. What did we learn from ourselves or from each other as a team from going through that difficult challenge? What did we learn about those qualities that we never would have seen if the challenge hadn't have come? What did we learn? Let's honor it. Let's acknowledge that. How did we grow or adapt or change as a result of it? How are we different now than we were, 6.5 years ago before the pandemic struck? In what ways am I a different person? And let's build on that. Let's build on that adaptive capacity that I displayed at that time. So you see in the difference that I want to start by looking at what people have done and what they have achieved. A good example of this is that recently I was helping a large organization that was going through a reduction in force and offboarding. And as many organizations have to do, and certainly that is a powerful and dramatic and impactful message to have to deliver. But the wisdom that was displayed by this organization is they took the time to understand the contributions, the achievements, the goals of the individual whose position was being eliminated, and they shared that with them. So not just your position's being eliminated, you've got an hour to leave, thank you. They also said, and in your time here are the things that you have done. Here's the contributions you made, the achievements, and we are so thankful for that. And while we have to make this decision in order to sustain long-term viability, we get it, and we want to honor what you have done. And I tell you what, the employees who left that that downsizing, that reduction in force, um, were a different group, and they had a different reaction than other ones that I have seen. In fact, many of them thanked the people who were giving them sharing the bad news, who were telling them about the circumstance, because they were treated with dignity and respect. Their assets, what they have brought to the company, had been framed and championed. And so I think that's the secret. That's the secret sauce that I want you to take away from this training. And so here, I want to give you another application of how trauma-informed policy, I referenced policy earlier, how that can help in a very common employment setting. A leader that has to address an employee who is having a performance improvement issue. And I'm having this meeting to be able to say, to find out what's going on, because things are off. Things are you're not meeting the performance goals that you had. And here's the thing, having, again, the old way of doing it might be pulling them into your office, sitting down, having a stern talk and saying, what's wrong with you? And which immediately, as you can guess, if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, and perhaps, many of us have, myself included, when a person in leadership approaches you with that kind of perspective, what's wrong with you, interested more in your deficits, it puts you on the defense. It puts you a step back. It makes you shut down. They're coming at me in an aggressive manner, and I'm just needing to protect myself. So I'm not going to share anything really. I'm not going to tell you at all what the actual reasons for the performance decrease might be. So instead of saying, what's wrong with you, starting with, what's strong with you? Let's take a look at those attributions that you've made to the company. Let's look at, when you started here, you learned your role so quickly, and you have been, a customer favorite, or you have been, at the top of productivity levels for months in a row, and now it's dipped. And I'm just curious. I want to find out what's strong with you, but also, you know, I want to figure out how I can get you back to that level where you are thriving, striving, and thriving, well at work as well as at home. Having that respectful curiosity. They are not a problem to be solved, a chore to be completed. They are a human to be encountered with respect and dignity. And so that respectful curiosity, that asset framing, develops a narrative in which they realize, okay, I can share with you, well, here's the things that have been going on. And this has been, I have family in some of the combat zones, or I have a relative who is in the military, and I'm really concerned about them getting pulled into this, or the recent natural disaster, has struck, my parents who live in the area, and I'm just trying, I don't know what to do for them. Let's find that out. Rather than coming at them with a cudgel, let's come at them with an openness and a curiosity that says, I want to find out how trauma might have been impacting your performance right now. And a trauma-informed leader will come and ask, what's strong with you? Some of the executive concepts, how do I, the thinking, the framework in which I want to view this, I want to highlight as well that attending to your own wellness. As I said earlier, you are human too. And so wellness matched with competence is compelling, it's attractive, it pulls people towards you. It reinforces your leadership role and commands respect. Knowing that you are taking care of yourself doesn't mean that I'm putting myself above others, but to share once again the trite and overused analogy, but we've all seen it when you're on a plane and they're given the safety spiel. Make sure you put the mask on you first before putting it on those next to you, because you're no good to them if you pass out. Then we've created an additional crisis. And so self-care is caring for your business as well. It's making sure you're able to respond when the time comes. And the big secret is that most leaders have not, they've often risen to the top not because of their brilliance or their skill, although certainly that was a part of it. But so many of them, when I talk to leaders in the corporate world, they admit, well, I got there because of the challenges I faced, the traumas I overcame, the ability to work through, to rise to that occasion, that post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is a hidden element for so many leaders because when they look back, yeah, the path wasn't all smooth and wasn't all roses, but I rose above it and I was able to endure, and I want to help others do exactly the same. So there is surprising strength in vulnerability when you're able to be authentic, when you're able to attune, and that is to hold space for the emotions without running away from them, and you're able to affirm the contributions that others have made, and the challenges that they have faced too. So I again just feel like I want to be very specific. This is not trauma-informed approach is not accepting lower standards. It's not making your workplace a therapy setting. It's not, um, you know, um, expecting poor performance as a given. No, it's about caring for the individual, and the better they feel, the more um, the more they're able to survive and thrive, um, the better they are at work. And so that expectation of excellence, but not perfection, and not the idea that because we all bring ourselves to work. If we're honest, if we look at ourselves in the mirror, as I look in the mirror as well, okay, perfection is perhaps something to aspire to, but the reality is I need to have an expectation of excellence. I need to make sure that I am striving and pursuing the purpose and mission of the organization in a way that achieves success. So that respectful communication that starts with an understanding that, hey, I don't know their full story, and the likelihood is they've probably gone through some traumas or potentially traumatic events just like I have. So I want to treat them with that dignity that protects them. And your employee assistance program is an underused but uniquely suited resource for you because it is a standard part of every EAP to provide consultation to leaders who face these challenges, coaching and training in trauma informed leadership. Your EAP can do that. EAP partners are there, and that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. You can activate these support resources. You don't have to be trauma informed in and of your own strength and by yourself. Your EAP can help you. R3 also is a viable source for consultation, for immediate response through critical incident response, but also through dedicated on-site counselors. And I share that because there are many businesses that we've worked with, particularly following COVID, in which they found they wanted a consistent, recognizable resource at the workplace. So whether it was a mental health professional who was able to respond at a cadence of their own choosing, somebody who was there once a week or once a month or once a quarter, but somebody who was able to be there and be a consistent face for continuity of care, as well as a very visible, strong image, reflection of the company's care and concern. That is part and parcel of shaping that culture. And so many businesses, particularly those that might have frequent exposure to powerful events, hospitals, emergency departments, first responders, energy organizations, and others that face challenges as part and parcel construction, as part and parcel of their business, where accidents may happen or stressful situations may be common, or at least somewhat common. And so having a dedicated on-site counselor is part and parcel of that, and many businesses have found that helpful. So as a leader, being able to normalize rather than saying, okay, well, let's wait until it's a big enough problem and then maybe we'll have a referral to EAP. Maybe then you could go to, seek out behavioral health treatment rather than waiting for problems to metastasize into that level of severity. being able to recognize that seeking behavioral health support is a strength, not a weakness, in the same way that I would seek out, you know, same reason that I saw my doctor for my annual physical 2 weeks ago, because um, that's part of taking care of myself. It's the same reason why I see my dentist next week. I've got a lot of medical appointments apparently this month. But seeing my dentist is taking care of my teeth, taking care of my behavioral health, perhaps through the EAP or through a dedicated on-site counselor, is how I take care of myself. There's no stigma attached. It's basic self-care. But as a leader, I want to recognize that people respond to stress differently, and so I want to be open to their willingness and their availability to seek resources at a time of their choosing. And we're wanting to, again, reduce stigma and normalize help seeking as the right thing to do. So as we come close to an end here, I just want to leave you with these key takeaways. You know, what have we learned, and what can we do from here? If you take nothing else from this presentation, I hope you recognize that exposure to trauma is in some sense inevitable. Again, these things have happened and more things are going to happen that we don't even know about. We know that. That is, trauma is in many ways a normative life experience, and so it is inevitable. But inaction, doing nothing, is not. That is entirely um, in your command. We may not be able to do anything to prevent the next crisis from happening, but where it goes from there is entirely up to you. And you can lead your people in that same way. And so a trauma-informed leader simply acknowledges that reality. They start by interacting with their employees in an asset framing way. Let's talk about first what you have achieved, your contributions, the things, the resources, and the skills that you have and have built before we address a problem. Leading by example, your own self-care is critical, and that they will look to you to see how well you're doing it as an example of how they can do it. And so you are part and parcel of demonstrating what a psychologically healthy workplace looks like, and you are not alone. For those who have employee assistance programs, utilize that resource. For those who are looking for consultation or who have specialized needs, R3 Continuum is that is what we do every day throughout the for the last 35 years, and so we stand ready to assist as well. So I want to end with, I know much of which I shared was dark, but I want to end with this quote from Helen Keller, that although the world is full of suffering, it's also full of the overcoming of it. And so I want to leave you with that. Thank you all for your attention, for your participation in this, and I want to stop and see now if there are any questions that I can answer.
All right. I have not seen any questions come in, but please feel free to ask away using the Q&A function. If we don't see any in the next minute or two, I think we can end today's session. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Very good. Thank you all as well for walking this journey with me and for your interest in R3 Continuum. Be well, each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you all.